Well, today's daf is daf tes, and we'll start on the top of the daf. Well, Rabbi Yishmael, the Omer ein ba yediyah betchila v'yesh ba yediyah basof bar korban hu. So Rabbi Yishmael, the Tana Rabbi Yishmael has a very unique shita in this whole complexion of shitos, and he holds, and he's the only one who maintains that there's a chiyuv korban olav yored, even though he didn't have the yediyah betchila. In other words, until now, we've been addressing the shita that is common amongst the Tanoim, that in order to be chayv a korban olav yored, you have to have had a yediyah mitchila. Meaning, if you never knew you were tameh, then why should you be held responsible for walking into the mikdash or eating kodesh? But in any event, according to Rabbi Shmuel, even in such a case, the aver was done. You were the cause of the chilul of kedushas hegdesh or kedushas hamikdash, and therefore you need a kapar for that. And that's the most extreme kind of shogeg, meaning extreme towards ones, almost beyond his control, and yet he still needs a kapara for that aver b'shogeg of chilul kedusha. So the Gemara asks, according to Rabbi Shmuel, Soyer hanasa b'chutz amay mechaper. In other words, what was the special chidush that the Torah gave inherent into the soyer of Yom Kippurim b'chutz? We thought that its unique kapara power was in the fact that if he did not have a yediyah neither batchilu v'abasov, that's where the soyer should come into play. But now you're telling me that he needs a korban olav yored, so it means his kapara would be limited to or restricted by the bringing of the korban. So why then would the soyer hachitzoni on Yom Kippur play such a role? So the Gemara answers, Ad she'ein bo yediyah lo b'tchila b'sov. Well, right now, as we know it, he doesn't have any yediyah whatsoever. Right? It's ein bo yediyah b'tchila, and although he gets the yediyah b'sov, but he hasn't gotten to that point yet. So at the moment that the soyer is brought in the mizbeach achitzon on Yom Kippurim, at that moment, he doesn't have the possibility of being chayav a korban because he doesn't have a yediyah at all. So the sort of slice of time right down the middle before he gets his yediyah, he needs a kapara. Otherwise, he's exposed to the the punishment for a sin. So the Gemara now is not happy with that. The Gemara says, "Hi, such a category of an avera, of an avon, which was shelo b'yidiyaso b'tchila. He didn't have any yediyah, and then he had a yediyah basof. That's the realm or the domain of two other seirim, the seiri Rosh Chodesh and the seiri Regalim. So once again, we come back to square one. Why do we need, in such a case of ein bo yediyah but tchilu v'yesh lidisof, why do we need these mechaprim? We have already Rosh Chodesh and Regalim. And we're answering Sover Rabbi Meir, the Omer Kol Seirim Kaparosin Shava Al Tumas Migdash V'Kadoshev. So Rabbi Meir, whose sheet is quoted in the Mishnah at the beginning of our Masechta, and whose sheet is going to be studied in depth on the next daf, on daf Yud, he's of the opinion that there's an absolute overlap between all the various mechaprim, again with the exception of the Sara Pnimi, that's in a special category, but all the others, whether it's Rosh Chodesh, whether it's Regalim, whether it's the Sar Hachitzoni of Yom Kippurim, in all these cases, there's an overlap, which means that you can have many different mechaprim for the same category of an avera, in order to cover situations where he did the avera between A and B. So he doesn't have the kapara of A, he has the kapara of B. So let's say, for example, Rosh Chodesh Nisan passed, and then he inadvertently went into the Migdash Tameh. He will not be able to avail himself of the kapara of Rosh Chodesh because he implemented the avera post Rosh Chodesh. But now it's Pesach, and they're going to bring the Se'irei Regalim of Pesach and the Se'irei Regalim. On the other hand, let's say he did the Avera after Pesach, and we'll have to anticipate Rosh Chodesh. But let's say that would be Rosh Chodesh Iyar. Let's say he did the Avera after Rosh Chodesh Iyar, then he'll need the kapara, for example, the Soyer HaChitzoni of Yom Kippur. Elamai Iskash, Lamai Hilchasa Iskash Chitzo Lepnimi. We had a Hekesh that compared both Se'irim on Yom Kippur, the Soyer Shenasa B'chutz with the Soyer Nasa B'fnim, and yet now we know clearly that each one had its well-defined area of kapara, and there was no overlap. Because as we said before, the Soyer Apnimi had its own unique kapara for the case of Hayalo Yediyah B'tchila, V'lo Basof. So what's the point of the Hekesh? What do we derive from this equation between the Shnei Seirim of Yom Kippurim, the Pnimi and the Chitzoni? The Gemara answers, Ma Pnimi Eino Mechaper B'shar Averos, Af Chitzon Eino Mechaper B'shar Averos. So let's give an example of Shar Averos. So with regard to, let's say, Tumas Migdosh V'Kadoshav, we're going to have Shar Averos in the case of a tar, She'ochal Satome. So he himself was tar, but he ate Kodshim Tmeim. And in that case, just like this Soyer HaPnimi cannot be Mechaper because it's a different Avera entirely, and the Kapar power of the Soyer HaPnimi is restricted and limited to Tumas Migdosh V'Kadosh when he, the Gavra, was Tameh. So too, with regard to the Soyer HaChitzoni, by virtue of this Hekesh, the Soyer HaChitzoni could not be Mechaper on Tahar Shachal Asatami. Now the Mishnah continues and says, Ad she'ein bo yediyah betchilu lo b'sof sirui gol v'sirui shchoshe b'chapim div Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda holds that in both cases where there was no yediyah, not betchilu, not b'sof, the seirim, both of Rosh Chodesh and of Regolim, both overlap in their power to be mechaper. Omar Rabbi Yehuda, Omar Shmuel, my time with Rabbi Yehuda. What is the source for the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda? Because again, if we compare and contrast Rabbi Yehuda with Rabbi Meir's Shita, the Tana Rabbi Meir, well, Rabbi Meir says that all the different Musafim, all the different Seirim overlap, and each one can atone for the same sin as the other one. And the Gemara is going to derive that from an extra vav later on. So now we have the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that that although the Seirim of both Rosh Chodesh and the Regalim overlap, meaning they both have the same power of Kapara, but not so for the Seirim. Again, as far as the Seir HaPnimi is concerned, there was never a doubt about that. That's totally exclusive to the Kapara for Yeshlo Hayalo Yediyah B'Tchila V'Lo Hayalo Yediyah B'Sof. But as far as cases where Lo Hayalo Yediyah Lo B'Tchila B'Sof or Lo Hayalo Yediyah B'Tchila Lo Hayalo Yediyah B'Sof, here we have the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda Neighbor Shmuel, and he's telling me that I can equate Seirim of Rosh Chodesh with the Seirim of the Regalim, but not the Soyer HaPnimi of Yom Kippur, the Soyer HaChitzoni, of Yom Kippur. So the Gemara says, Omar Kra, he derives it, Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, from a pasuk Seir Izem Echad L'Chatos Lashem. And what is the meaning of the word Lashem here in the pasuk? It's sort of unnecessary. So apparently, what Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel saw in that extra word Lashem is something that reveals the nature of that sin for which the soyer is mechaper. And what kind of sin, categorize it in its very essence, is it mechaper? Chet she'ein makir bo el Hashem yehi soyer ze mechaper. So it's telling you that when you have a situation where ein bo yediyah lo b'tchila lo b'sof, so the only one who's makir, the one with a capital O, who's makir, capital W, the sin is only Hashem. He himself is unaware that he was Tomei. He never knew that he was Tomei. Not then, before he entered into the Mikdash Reit Kodesh, or even today. And in such a case, the Soyer Rosh Chodesh is mechaper based on this pasuk of Lashem. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, you think Lashem is free, it's a free agent because you don't have any drashas from the word Lashem. Hibi boile l'reish lakish, the Reish Lakish, man ishtanes soyer shel Rosh Chodesh sheneber Lashem, Amar Kodesh Baruch Hu. It's kaviyachol as if Hashem himself needs the kapar. The kapar is Lashem. It's an atonement for God. Why? Because soyer zeh kapar shmi atitiyas hayareach. Right? You remember at the time of creation, God called upon the two ma'oros, and they should have dominion. And the Yareach came along and said, "How could be shnei ksarim, shnei malachim, mishtam shebikeser echad? You can't have that." So Hashem was memayit the Levana, and the truth be told, that the Levana had a very good argument, and maybe it didn't deserve such a such a harsh punishment. And Hashem now wants a kapara, kaviyachol. Now, of course, on a philosophical level, there's going to be a great deal of literature here on this agadic statement. How could it possibly be that Hashem needs a kapara? But maybe we'll just mention one of the approaches, and that is the Rif. The Rif says Hashem wanted to give the Areach something that would placate the Areach if the Areach wouldn't get its desire, its will to be the sole dominion over the earth. So in order to placate the Yareach, says the Rif, Hashem gave the Yareach the power of being in charge of the calendar months of the Hebrew calendar. And that's going to be expressed in the unique power of Rosh Chodesh to be mechaper on an Avera b'shogeg of lo haya lo yediyah lo b'tchila v'lo b'sof. So on Rosh Chodesh, when we bring the carbon of the soyer, of the musaf service of Rosh Chodesh, what we're doing is we are sort of, according to the Rif, we're giving the moon something from Hashem to replace the fact that Hashem could not satisfy the moon's desire for the dominion, as we discussed before. Gemara asks the following question: Imkain lema kra al Hashem. You have to know a lot of digduk here. According to Gemara's kasha, the word Lashem doesn't indicate that this is a kapara on behalf of Hashem. Because if that be the case, it was said al Hashem, meaning on the, so to speak, the sin of being memayit the levana. And now you're asking me a question: how can we learn anything from Lashem, meaning that it's a chet that only Hashem is aware of, and that's what the kapara power of Rosh Chodesh is in the Soyer HaShel Musaf. You need it in order to explain that this carbon is, so to speak, a kapara for the fact that Hashem was memayit the levana. No. If we were only deriving the conclusion that Hashem is memayit the levana, and therefore we want to bring a carbon on his behalf as a kapara, then it would have said al Hashem, on behalf of God. So what is Lashem? My Lashem, Lichid Amraran, to teach us, as Rabbi Yehuda said, that the soyer of Rosh Chodesh is mechaper for a chet that's only been known to Hashem, it's lo hoya lo yediyah lo betchil lo b'sof. Okay, now that you've derived the conclusion from the fact that it says Lashem and not Al Hashem, to reject, l'chara you should be rejecting the limud of Reish Lakish, namely that Hashem is bringing a kapara for being Mamaita of her. In Keilem Akroch Chatos Hashem, my Lashem Shmamino Tarte. So we can derive two conclusions from two different diukim in the same pasuk. Lashem is going to teach me that, well, let me see if I can get this right. If it's Chatos Hashem would mean a Chatos for Hashem, meaning, no. Let me try it one more time. Chatos Hashem means a chet that only Hashem is aware of. But then it says Lashem on behalf of Hashem. So that means that it's brought for the Miyud Halavon. The Gemara says in a Chaper Nami Afilu B'Shar Averos. In other words, you're now telling me that the kapor power inherent in the Sa'ir of Rosh Chodesh is limited to Tumas Mikdash V'Kadoshav. Why should it be limited to Tumas Mikdash V'Kadoshav? Why not expand it to include even other kinds of sins? I don't know which sins the Gemara has in mind here. He says there's no indication of any specific category. Fine. So Gemara answers, Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel, Hoil v'zeh ba b'zman kavua, ma zeh inu mechaper ela al tumas migdash v'kadoshav, av zeh inu mechaper ela al tumas migdash v'kadoshav. So now we have an equation between the Soyer HaChitzoni of Yom HaKippurim and the Soyer of the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh. Let's start with the Soyer of the Mizbeach HaChitzon of Yom HaKippurim, and there it's Zman Kavua, meaning that is connected to Yom HaKippur. So too, in the case of the Musaf Sa'ir of Rosh Chodesh, it's connected to a specific time. Well, once we have that basic fundamental equation between the two, now we're going to apply it to the Kapara power. And we're going to say that just like the Mizbeach HaChitzon has the Kapara power only for Tumas Migdash v'Kadoshim, so too, the Sa'ir of Rosh Chodesh only has Kapara power for Tumas Migdash v'Kadoshim. Gemara asked Ashkan Se'irei Roshei Chadashim, Se'irei Regol Midon. Right, we said that the Se'irim of the Regalim also have the Kapara power for Tumas Migdash v'Kadoshim. How do we know such a thing? We've already established that the Tumas Migdash v'Kadoshav is common to both the Kapara power of the Musaf of Rosh Chodesh and of the Soyer HaChitzoni of Yom HaKippurim. So how do we fit Regalim into that context? If we go back to Tana Debei Rabbi Shmuel, that there's a certain binyan av of Yom HaKippurim, and from the binyan av Yom HaKippurim we could equate other seirim that are brought, like we did with the seir of Rosh Chodesh. Let's do it also with the seir of Golim. Eimol ikal mifra. Oh, no. You can't say that just because we derive the conclusion about the kapara power of Tumas Migdash Ketaf in Rosh Chodesh from Yom Kippur, therefore we can extend it to include even what? Even Se'iri Regalim. Why? Rosh Chodesh ke'kein tadir. If you're going to say that just like Rosh Chodesh is Mechaper on Tumas Migdash Ketaf, so to Regalim is, wait a minute, Rosh Chodesh is tadir. Now, again, tadir here in this context is not a great leap of faith over here because Rosh Chodesh comes 12 times a year. And the Regalim come, let's say, 7 days out of a year. So let's say that for one reason or another, we can justify that Rosh Chodesh in the Gemara's understanding is Tadir vis-a-vis Regalim. He says here in the note that no, he does. I don't see that he answers this question. Okay. Now we know that Yom Kippurim, meaning the Sarah Hachitzot Yom Kippurim, is mechaper on Tumas Mikdash Gadasha. So let's derive the regalim from then. No, Shkei Kaparasa. Yom Kippurim is different because there's so much kapara power in Yom Kippurim, right? Itzumo shel Yom Mechaper. On all Averos. Well, it's not exactly so. It's not really all Averos. But let's say on all Bittul essays, on all Lavim, Chiv Karis is questionable. So again, we have a pircha now. You can't derive any conclusions about the kapar power of the regalim from Yom Kippurim. Yom Kippurim is kaparasa meruba. Tema, and maybe you'll answer